Welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to welcome Dr. Gita Pensa and Amanda Hill. Thanks for joining us today, Gita and Amanda.
Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. It looks like Amanda froze.
Here she is.
Hey, I'm here.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. So I always start by saying how we met, and that would be LinkedIn. And I'm going to have you introduce yourselves shortly. But just to get started, Gita is an emergency physician and pioneer in physician litigation, stress coaching, and support. And I reached out to you, Gita, way back on April 7th of last year. So you were actually one of my first LinkedIn connections. And I think it's because I knew you were going to be doing a podcast with Dr. Michael Hirsch and Dr. Arpita Gupta De Palma on their Doctors Living Deliberately. And then Amanda, you are a lawyer and a fierce advocate for physicians. And you have the distinction of being my very first repeat guest. So congratulations.
Yay!
Yeah. And in that episode a few weeks ago, we talked about contract negotiations for doctors with Eva Minkoff, and that's episode number 37, if anybody wants to check it out. So today we'll be talking about your shared perspectives related to doctors, litigation, and also online reviews. Gita says the majority of physicians are sued during their careers, yet most are unprepared. Gita has been there and she offers physician defendant support and coaching. Amanda says doctors are facing increased online complaints, which can really cause havoc with their license. So as we get started, Gita, what would you most like our audience to know about you?
I think you pretty much covered it. I myself was a defendant in a really prolonged malpractice case, and that's what led to my interest in teaching and coaching around this. I felt during the process that I didn't understand anything, and that lack of understanding really fueled my anxiety. I think it helped me to catastrophize a lot. I couldn't real size any of the risks. It was in a case, I went to trial for it twice. And I did win both times, but I didn't really understand the appeals process. I just had no understanding. And I think that doctors are pretty smart people overall. And if we're armed with information and knowledge, that the anxiety that goes along with these processes could be mitigated. It won't go away, but there is absolutely a role for just being more prepared. And I think we're capable of doing that.
Well, thank you for your work doing that you're doing to help physicians in this way. It's so very important.
Thank you.
Amanda, what would you like our audience to know about you as we get started?
Well, less about me, but more about the topic today, which is I completely relate to what you're saying, Gita. I mean, I have physicians that think, oh, med mal suits. Okay, fine. I can handle that. I have insurance. I don't think what they realize is there's a lot of other avenues that can cause them strain. I mean, like keeping them up at night, massive anxiety, gutting them emotionally, a breach of contract claim, partnership disputes that go awry. I mean, all of these types of lawsuits are not just lawsuits, but like I was explaining to you, I mean, board complaints against your licensure, these things, you need support. I mean, we need to support physicians through this because it's not instinctive. It's counterintuitive. Physicians are there to practice medicine, not go through this legal/licensure complaint process. So I'd love to talk about, how to get support, how to find your person, whether it's your lawyer or your coach, someone that's been through it. Because I think it's really important for us to show that, it's normal. Let's normalize it to feel overwhelmed and flooded and confused by it, and that there are ways that we can help you through it. Because I'm passionate about that. I hate litigation and I'm a lawyer. I don't like the conflict. I want doctors to be able to go back to practicing and feel safe and secure. And I don't want them to be up at night and worrying about this lawsuit or how do I get out of this deal or how do I get my buyout that's fair or how do I defend myself in front of the board. So I think if we can all go in this together as a community to help doctors feel supported, then we're winning.
Yeah,
I love that.
that's so important. So Gita, what would you like us to know about the evolution of you involved in what you're doing now? If you wanted to share a little more.
Sure. And it's been a long evolution from very distressed defendant to a coach for other defendants and an educator for other defendants. So I would say that around the time of the overturning of my verdict in 2015, I'd won at trial in 2011. I saw this person in 2006. It was a super long road. At 2015, I totally hit rock bottom. Like when they told me like, oh, you have to go back to trial. I joke sometimes that if people have seen the Hunger Games, like when Katniss has to go back the second time, like it just feel like I can't possibly do that. And I really hit a rock bottom place. And which kind of led to an epiphany. It was really a sink or swim time. And I decided to swim. I was like, I don't know how to swim, but if I don't learn how to swim right now, I am not going to make it. And so that was the first time I really opened myself up to getting external help. And I didn't even know there wasn't anything that had been offered to me, but I just started looking and I was like, if it's not in litigation, maybe other self-help books or therapy or coaching or whatever. And so I started doing all the things and trying all the things. And I did gradually find out like, oh, wow, like there are things that help me. I tried a whole lot of stuff and then some stuff stuck and some things didn't, but it began this process of like true transformation about how I think of myself as a person, as a physician, how I'm present in my life, how I'm present with my patients. And so then I assembled that into a podcast because part of what my career change had led me to do was I became, for our residency program, the educational technology and social media person, which I knew nothing about before I started. But I learned I learned how to podcast, and I was doing a podcast for a journal, and then I thought, I have learned so much about this process. And I wasn't going on trial yet again, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I can do something novel with what I've learned. And if I do interviews with doctors, like I think I could make something useful. And so that was where the podcast started. By the time I went to trial a second time, totally different person. I invited my residents to watch me testify. I knew what I was doing. I didn't know what the outcome would be because you never can, but I knew that I was going to go in and own that room. And I won. And then it was time to get started. So the podcast started, and then people started finding me, asking me to talk to them, which I did gladly. And then I thought, like, I should probably learn how to like really do this. I thought I had some skills as a doctor doing that, but I thought, like, there's probably a way that I could do it better. So I started learning more about coaching. I had a coaching partner, Sheeta Shaffi, who has worked with Michael and Arpita, and and so I learned a lot of whatever instruction I had been in sort of like professional coaching. They come at it from more of a life coaching perspective. I learned a ton doing that, setting up a coaching practice, and now I do a lot of speaking. I do one-on-one and group coaching, and right now I'm doing a really cool pilot program with an insurance company where I'm working with their defendants as a group to teach. We're not talking about any cases. We're just learning about the process, what to expect, deposition, all just basic instruction. And
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that really ignorance is what causes the fear and the trepidation and the overwhelm, right? Because
1,000%.
they've never been through it. Like, why would you know? And especially, and some even really good lawyers are not always great with explaining how it works and normalizing that to the client, right? I mean, sometimes when I sit down with the client, I'm like, look, we're just going to talk about how this medical board process is going to work or what this lawsuit will look like for you. Because clients are like, why are all these motions being filed? Why is there a delay? This feels like it's personal. What is happening? And it's so overwhelming. And sometimes even lawyers aren't great at sitting down with doctors saying, okay, this is brand new to you. We do it all the time. So for us, it's very normal and common. Think about it just in the same vein of a patient sitting in front of an oncologist for the first time hearing they have cancer. They're like, what? And the doctor's like, this is old hat. I talk about this every day. I know all about it. But for the patient, it's new. And so I think it's the same with the doctor. They're in a different world. And, any avenue of explanation, I think you working with insurance companies is brilliant. I hope that pilot project blows up. But even, finding someone who can explain it to you where it's in your language, to say, look, this is what's going to happen. It's not personal. This is how this process works. And this is normal and nothing is out of the ordinary. And we're going to help you and protect you. And we're going to walk you through every step. A lot of times doctors either fear that they're out of control. Like, does my lawyer know what they're doing? Am I being protected? Is this gonna work? And that's hard. Just letting go is hard, right? Just like a patient who's like, is this doctor know what they're doing? This is my life in their hands. I don't know. A lot of letting go of control and then just learning, like you're saying, finally just said, I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn how to be a good defendant. I'm going to learn this process. It's not fear. I don't fear it anymore. And so that's, I think, why all of us need to be talking at it from our own perspectives, to explain it. So we can say, I've done this before. Let me show you how it works. And there's the lawsuit side, and then there's just conflicts in general. I mean, a lot of times I just want to talk about these major conflicts and like how to process those. They call us attorneys and counselors, and I do a lot of the counseling part too, right? It's just like trying to help them understand that in your life, like you said, you probably will go through some legal battle of some kind. It might not be a medical malpractice case, but it might be a business dispute. It might be a licensure concern. It might be something, and that's okay. Like you have help, you have resources. And I think that's just, taking the edge off right there is just explaining to doctors that there are people out there that have gone through this before you and they can guide you through it.
I think we don't even know when we need a lawyer. I mean, we know with malpractice, we need a lawyer.
Right.
Like that's like we get it. We have an insurance company, then we're gonna get a lawyer. Okay. Like we get that part. We're still terrified. But for a lot of these things, I just did a podcast episode about board complaints and board.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. And so I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that like, your first call shouldn't be to an attorney when that happens. You feel like, oh, I'll just explain myself to the board. Because there are doctors.
Well, let me tell you my take on that. I love talking about board complaints because I'm passionate about helping doctors, right? So if this is an area that I feel like is a big weakness that I'd love to help fill. But when doctors get a board complaint, it's very personal, right? And sometimes patients use the board as like a Yelp review, like, oh, I'll just file a board complaint. It's like, oh, this is their license, right? So to the doctor, it's super personal. It's very attacking. Like, how dare they go to the medical board about this dumb issue, in your mind. So what happens is that when doctors file their own responses, they're very defensive. I mean, 99% of the time when I review any response that a doctor has to a complaint, a medical board issue, it's always extremely defensive, and it's not written in a way that comes across well. Not that the doctor's not trying to, it's just that's not their skill. They're not advocates for their own self, so they write it in a way that's like, this person's wrong, I'm right. How dare they? That's how it comes across.
That's what
this person's
feel.
Crazy.
So we write what we feel.
And I don't blame you. I would feel the same way as someone came after me. So that's why I think it's important, whether it's a lawyer or whether it's, a writing person or, your coach, but you need to have somebody review those responses. Because what I do is I say, you tell me everything. Don't hold back. You can be as aggressive and defensive, whatever. Don't worry about the emotional part. Just dump it all in there. Then I can then turn it into a timeline that's very rational and reasonable and shows the board that you follow the standard of care and that at no time did you deviate and that this complaint, it has no foundation. Right. That's important. I think it's important for doctors to get help on board complaints, because what happens if you don't, then the board can say, well, we're going to call a hearing because it sounds like there's some conflict here. We want to dig deeper. And then all of a sudden it grows, and then you grab a lawyer at the last minute and you're like freaking out. So it helps any of these situations to get help, and this isn't about pitching lawyers. It's about just getting someone to help you navigate that to where you're not as defensive. Because
somebody who knows,
it's funny. It's the same.
Somebody knows what they're doing.
Yeah. And it's instinct to get defensive. So you need someone to help calm that down and write a response that is more helpful for you, I think.
Right. Yeah. I think that, and I think understanding your audience is huge, right? And so if you're responding to a board complaint, like that letter has to be written with a certain degree of deference because they have a lot of power over you. Right. And so when you go in and you're like, want to punch somebody in the nose, like that's not going to work for you.
Yeah, especially, especially when it's like really ludicrous, like someone didn't get their prescription, and then they go file off this board complaint against this vascular surgeon or because they feel like I had one doctor who's got a board complaint because someone said, I can't believe they gave me insulin. I don't even have diabetes. This person's a quack. The doctor was like, you do have diabetes. Your sugars are through the roof. I put you on metformin. Like what? Like it doesn't even make sense. And so, but you can't react that way to the board. You can't be like, this person's a crazy loon. You have to say, look, this is the time I treated him. This is the actual care of the treatment that I did. It's within the standard of care. I don't know where this complaint's coming from, but in any event, looking at the facts, nothing happened wrong. And you really have to refocus that, like you said, make it reasoned and rational. And sometimes you need help with that. Just like they need help with you or me or someone to explain the litigation process and how to be a good witness. I had a client call me once and he said, "Hey, Amanda, I got a call from like CBS News. Is that okay? Like something, the FBI wants to talk to me. Like, should I just call them?" And I'm like, no, what is happening? Stop. Let me meet with you and go through what. So it turned out that his practice that he left, we worked for a pain management group that was involved in a bunch of pill, oxy issues. There was a big fraud case and they wanted to interview him and sort of root out what he knew, what he didn't know. And I was like, whoa, stop. We need to sit down. I need to prep you on what you really need to focus on and how you're going to talk. I don't want to get you in trouble. But again, he didn't know. He had no idea what to say. Should I just call and tell him my random thoughts or the rumors that were spreading around about this group? So that's important to get help before you just go commando, out there talking and responding and flying, through it, because you don't know what you're doing. And that's help is available. I think that's the thing. Help is available.
And I think that naivete, like we don't even know that we're naive. Really,
right.
We think, oh, we're doctors. We know how to talk to people. Like
right.
I'm sure, I don't know how to not to get myself in trouble. And the truth is that we don't. Like we do not understand all the ramifications because we don't understand the systems in which we're being thrown. We just don't have any experience with them, and we expect everything to work like medicine, and it does not.
Very true.
That's key. Yeah. And so Gita, just thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And you took what was one of the worst experiences of your life and you turned it around, and now you're helping so many other doctors, and just the example that you're putting to move forward. And I'm so glad that you got to a better place. And, I just think that's amazing that you did that.
Thank you, Kim. I want to thank you for what you're doing because, it's sort of the counterpoint to all these like angry Yelp reviews or, the complaints.
Right.
There's a lot of that negativity going on about medicine right now. So it's really heartwarming to have somebody who we know is in our corner. So thank you so much for doing these.
Yeah, well, thank you. You're very welcome. That does bring to mind something that I don't know if you'll remember this post, but a doctor had commented in relation to litigation that even when it's over, it goes away, but it never really goes away. There's a lasting impact, and learning how to navigate the experience is essential. And then I shared either on that post or with you that holds true for the patient on the other side as well. Because of course there's ambulance chasers, but then there's times where something does happen that can affect you every day for the rest of your life. And I thought you had a really good response. And again, I don't remember if it was on the poster to me.
I don't remember my response, so I'm like, what did I say?
Okay, it was really good. Sorry. You said it is hard to be on both sides of this chasm. We know patients get hurt, but the system is so indiscriminate, and it is impossible to get to an errorless state in medicine. So the question, I think, really is how to mitigate the suffering on both sides in a way that preserves everyone's humanity, including the healthcare worker.
Okay, I stand by that
response. I approve that message, Gita.
And if I have to say, because Amanda, maybe you could speak to this a minute, is like sometimes there are things that I would think that doctors can learn how to do differently in the future. And I know that things are really hard, and I know that they're limited in the amount of time they spend with their patients, but all my doctors I have right now are incredible. And even if our visit is 15 or 20 minutes, we have a relationship. And I feel like that's so important, and to have that communication. So if something, and I've actually done an article and podcast with Kevin MD on having crucial conversations with doctors. And I feel like that's so important. And if you do it right, then some of this I think could be right? If you have a relationship with your doctor, so it's the patient's responsibility and the doctor's. So if you have something to share, instead of writing a bad review, talk to your doctor about it. And then though, if something goes wrong, if the doctor can offer an apology or explain in whatever way they're comfortable doing so, then the patient isn't left feeling confused and alone.
Right.
Yeah, I totally understand. And I heard Chris Voss on a podcast the other day. He wrote a big negotiation book, and he was a hostage negotiator and dealt with like big high ticket, international crises, right? So this guy is in major conflict situations. But he said empathy, we're not talking about empathy like, oh, I'm sorry, I understand where you're coming from. He's like, we're talking about empathy like, can you phrase the other person's perspective in their words in a way that they feel seen? Even if you don't agree with it, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to, really have any softness or compassion. It's not an emotional thing. Empathy is just understanding the other person's perspective. And when I used to deal with patients a long time ago, early in my career, I was like the patient relations advocate or something, something that the angry people would get to me, because the doctors would go, oh, have them call Amanda. We don't want to deal with it. And a lot of times it was just, could I phrase their concern in a way that they felt like, yes, that's exactly how I felt. Then you can get somewhere. Then you're like, from what I'm hearing, you did get, you got a chemical burn in your eye from a result of this procedure that was very rare, but it still hurt. And it caused you to have blurry vision for a week, and you lost work and you had to stay home and you missed your kid's thing. They're like, yes, that's exactly what happened. Then you're like, now we can get somewhere, because they're like, they hear me. The thing that causes the most discord is when the doctor's like, you're crazy, that doesn't happen. They're like, you're not listening. Yes, I do, but that's not a complication. That doesn't even make sense. You're over exaggerating. It's like war. So being able to empathize, like state the other person's perspective, and then you can form a solution. Then you can negotiate a compromise and resolve it. And that's something I try to teach doctors all the time. And you need help with that. You're not trained in that. Nobody's a Chris Voss out there, doing
the first time I learned about strategic communication, I was like, I mean, it sounds good, but I was just like, why is no one teaching doctors how to do that? Like, this is something we ought to know how. I mean, it would make our lives so much better if someone had trained us, like how to have these conversations. That's a genius way of approaching it. Like, that is exactly, when we give it these names, and a lot of doctors like me, motivational interviewing or whatever, whatever it is that we're sort of taught to, but I mean, really employing it in practice and getting very skilled at it is a real gift. And the trouble I find is that sometimes, you can diffuse situations by these conversations, but sometimes, like with us, we never got the chance to diffuse that situation. And then we're served with notice, and then that opportunity is now gone.
That's true.
The only opportunity now to strategically communicate is in a deposition or as a trial witness. And it's really unfortunate. So, some of these programs where, these communication resolution programs, these things where they can bring parties together, where you can have those sorts of conversations, that's where I think training in being able to do that kind of reflective listening, and then, meeting and then guiding the conversation towards like what is true for you, would be a huge gift. I think people who could learn how to do that well, there are a lot of people that would benefit from that.
Well, and I think that the key is not letting things fester. A lot of doctors just bury their head in the sand. Like, there's a problem. They're like, oh, well, I'll have my office manager deal with that. Somebody can deal with that. That probably will go away. And then it doesn't go away. And then it gets bigger and bigger. So I think the key is, I talk a lot about this in like the sexual harassment context, like if there's sexual harassment going on, you can't just assume it's going to stop. You have to intervene immediately and make sure that you cut that off. Same with like a difficult patient interaction, a complication, intervene early. and try to start that, proactive conversation before it gets out of control. Because I had a case once where it was terrible, terrible, terrible case, brain damage baby case. And there's no good about that, right? Zero people are defending. I mean, it was just a bad set of circumstances. And I represented the OBGYN, and there was a problem with the leads. There was a problem with the nurse. There was like, perfect storm of issues that happened. And there was an oxygen deficiency, et cetera. We intervened immediately. That OB was right there. What can we do? How can we help your family through this? How can we bring you dinner? This is an unfortunate situation. We are on it. Let's talk about. She was the only one that wasn't sued in that case, because they felt a connection with her. They were like, this isn't your fault. You care. And so that's why it's important to intervene early, to have those conversations, jump in, get help. Don't just bury your head and say, oh, well, it's probably nothing. Obviously people can tell that I didn't do anything wrong. No,
I
they
love
can't.
that I love that you're telling that story. Is a great story. That is, because I work with residents, and they, what the traditional teaching is, like, your first phone call is to risk.
Right.
And as soon as you call risk, they are going to tell you to circle the wagon, in most institutions, which is a really archaic way of dealing with these conflicts. I mean, it is really that, or someone, like, not all the patient care, but the patient really needs to know that you care. And to show that you care, like, first you have to care, but then you have to demonstrate that you care. And it is hard to take your lumps and to go into someone who is angry and who has had a terrible thing happen in their life, and to sit down and be with them in their pain. And if no one is with them in their pain, they are going to be very hurt. And a lot of this comes from hurt. And it's really unfortunate. Like, all of us, when I said bring humanity back into this, I mean, a lot of us lose our humanity in these, these things happen in medicine. We know that they do, but what we're being deprived of by the system that we're forced to operate in, is the opportunity to, as a human being caring for another human being, to sit down and talk about it in a way that, in a human way of, I am able to have grief with you about this outcome. I feel my own version of this grief. I want to help in whatever way I can help. I am here at your disposal. Let me help. I know you might be angry. I know you are hurt. This is a terrible situation.
Yep.
This is how it happened. I mean, a lot of people sue because they can't find information about what happened.
And they feel, and it's a disconnect because they know something went wrong and no one is being honest. And so and it's revenge. They're so angry, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, our first call was to Whole Foods. We wanted to get food for this family because she had other kids at home, and she's sitting there going through this massively destructive time. So yeah, I think we're going to change that conversation. I'm not the typical lawyer, so I'm not going to go around and say, oh, protect yourself. Don't say anything. Read with risk. Let's form a plan. Let's shield ourselves from the situation. No, we go in. You go straight in. And like this, there's no good that is coming from this. It's grief. It's sadness, but we're here for you. And, some things do, we can all say, well, medicine's not a perfect science. Medicine is risk. Of course it does, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have real pain and real consequences that we can address head on.
So I've shared this before, since every episode has to stand alone. I'm going to share it again. Jean Paul Brutus, I don't know if you've seen this book, Secrets and Lies from the Operating Room. And there's a paragraph in here, and I'm going to read it because it's really important. And what he says is how to handle a complication. That a good way to discuss it with the patient is to say, I'm very sorry this has happened to you. This is not the outcome that any of us wanted for you. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that you have had to go through this. I know that you're feeling very upset, frustrated, and angry, and I would be feeling the same way. All I can do is say, I'm sorry that you're in this situation, and we're going to do everything we can to understand the events leading up to this so that we can avoid it happening again. In the meantime, I want you to know that I'm here for you if there's anything I can do.
Nailed it. Yeah.
And that would mean so much.
Having this conversation is half the battle, right? It's just, so there's one side that's like, it's gotten so far along, like you said, Gita, you're already in the lawsuit. Now you got to get help through it. And then the other side's backing up to, wait a minute, what can we do before? So it doesn't get to that point. You know, both are important conversations, because sometimes you didn't have the opportunity to talk to that. You had no idea this was even coming, and it hit you out of nowhere. And then you still need support. So, you know, we can't put blame on where you fall on the spectrum. It's just wherever you are, just know that you're not alone. There are resources to help you, and that you do need some help through it because you're not naturally trained at it. And we can try to go back to residency programs too. You know, it's like there's not a one size fits all approach. I want to help residents understand it. I also want mid-career physicians to understand that if you're in it, there's hope.
Mhm.
I mean, you and I talked about that a lot, Kim, before, about making sure that there's hope, because the
Right.
suicide rates are going up, the depression rates are increasing, like this feeling of being flooded. You know, part of what I'm just trying to pierce that balloon. There is hope. There is help.
Well,
Don't feel like there is no one out there. Gita is a perfect example. This is someone who's literally been through it and now is going to help you through it. So I love that, in whatever form or flavor you find it.
right. And then that's why I do this, right? I just don't have doctors come on here and complain, right? Because they could do that too. But it's like I just try to, it's a word of hope for doctors, you know? So doctors are sharing all kinds of experiences. So as we start to wind down, Gita, would you like to share anything? Because I know that what you've had to deal with is incredibly difficult, incredibly painful. And then to still see patients, maybe if you have a word or two for doctors that either have gone through this or will go through it, you know, what really helps you in your mindset?
I believe that there is a way to incorporate these experiences into who you are as a doctor, or who you are as a human being. There is a way to learn from them, accept them. It will help you become, if you let it, a more compassionate physician, and even a better doctor. And there's 2 episodes on the podcast called Life After Litigation. I think you could even go so far as to use litigation as a catalyst, for looking at your life in totality, and, you know, course correcting where you need to, and coming out better on the other side. I waited too long before I learned that that was a possibility, but I know it's a possibility now, just from my own life, and then from the people that I've worked with. And so, yes, there is hope.
Mm. Well, thank you very much. And how can our listeners get in touch with you?
They can find me at my website. It's doctorsandlitigation.com.
Okay, that sounds great. And Amanda, what would your final words that you want to share? Actually, and I know you even had some advice for patients as far as having compassion for the amount of behind scenes work that doctors have to deal with.
Well, yeah. Well, first I'll start with doctors. Just, my biggest thing that I find crippling, by far, I would say hands down, that cripples a doctor is victimhood. You
Mm.
cannot get stuck in victimhood, right? Like, this is unfair. It happened to me. I'm a victim of this. As Gita said, you know, it is a growth opportunity. Yes, it sucks. It's hard. It's expensive. All of those things are true, but it doesn't mean you can't leapfrog that and grow and learn from it. Because if you get stuck in that pit, it's like quicksand of victimhood. I am a victim. This thing happened to me. I'm so angry. Then it just boils, and you never grow. You never move from it, you know, no matter what it is. And so I think that's the biggest thing I try to teach doctors is, don't get stuck in that pit. It serves you none. It does not help you, you know, to bitter and anger and resentfulness. You've got to move past it and say, what can I take from this? No matter what bad experience, whether you suffered from cancer, divorce, lawsuits, whatever the bad thing is, you've got to figure out a way to grow from it. So I think that's the biggest lesson that I want to put out there into the universe. It's just, whatever resources, call Gita, call your coach, call your therapist, call your lawyer, and try to figure out how to get yourself out of that pit.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that you've also shared to be respectful and follow up as far as patients if you don't hear anything through the portal, instead of just, you know, writing a bad review. It's all about, you know,
Right. Yes.
communication and building relationships. And I'll put your contact information, Amanda, on the show notes and when I share the post on LinkedIn. So I just wanted to thank you both very much for being my guests today. I think this was a really great conversation, and any doctors can feel free to reach out to either one of you. And thank you for all you're doing to help your colleagues. And
Thank you,
Thank you very
Kim.
much.
oh,
We'll
you're
talk later.
welcome. So in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.